July 17, 1959, 3:10 a.m. Billie Holiday was dying at Metropolitan Hospital, 44 years old, taking her last breaths. Liver cirrhosis and heart failure were killing her. But what really killed her was something else: betrayal. As she lay dying, nurses found $750 hidden under Billie's mattress, money she'd secretly saved for her own funeral expenses. But hours earlier, Billie's husband and manager Louis McKay had come to the hospital, accessed Billie's bank account, and withdrawn the last $2,000. While Billie was dying, McKay was pocketing the money, and worst of all, McKay never paid for the funeral. Billie Holiday, one of America's most famous jazz singers, nearly ended up in a pauper's grave because her husband had stolen her money. But this was only the beginning, because Louis McKay's betrayal of Billie had started years earlier, and it was planned, systematic, and deadly. And the most shocking part of the story: McKay controlled Billie by keeping her addicted, giving and withholding heroin to keep her weak, and when Billie died, he would use her name to make a fortune. If you're curious about music history's darkest betrayal stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because we'll keep sharing the shocking truths behind famous artists, the secrets nobody else tells. The story of Louis McKay and Billie Holiday began in the mid-1940s, right after the Jimmy Monroe disaster. Billie was 29 years old, had just escaped Monroe's violence and manipulation, and was desperately trying to return to normal. But she couldn't return to normal, because Monroe had left the biggest invisible wound: heroin addiction. Billie was using drugs every day, her career was shaken, and her money was dwindling. Right at this point, Louis McKay appeared. McKay was 30 years old, handsome, and introduced himself as a businessman. He ran a small nightclub in Harlem, and was known in jazz circles. When McKay first saw Billie, he recognized the opportunity: a famous singer, financially struggling, emotionally fragile and addicted. The perfect target. McKay approached Billie, and was kind, offered help, and showed interest. He told Billie, "You're a great artist, but bad people are using you. Let me help you." Billie was cautious because the Monroe experience had made her careful, but McKay was patient. Slowly, he gained Billie's trust. When he lent money, he didn't demand it back immediately. He did small favors without expecting anything in return, and most importantly, he didn't judge Billie's drug addiction. In the first years, McKay and Billie had a romantic relationship. Billie loved McKay because McKay did something Monroe hadn't: he listened, he supported, and he didn't control. But in reality, McKay was just waiting for the right time. Because McKay knew, if he tried to control Billie immediately, she would run. But if he slowly, invisibly seeped into every corner of Billie's life, she would fall into the trap without realizing it. And that was exactly McKay's plan. By the late 1940s, Billie and McKay's relationship ended. Billie started dating other men, got married, got divorced, and her life continued chaotically. But McKay never went away. He stayed as a friend, occasionally visited Billie, and waited. Because McKay knew the worse Billie's life got, the more she would need McKay, and McKay was right. By 1956, Billie Holiday's life had collapsed. She was 41 years old but looked 60. Heroin addiction had destroyed her. Her liver was damaged, her lungs were weak, her voice wasn't what it used to be, and her body was in constant pain. Her career was in a similar state. Her cabaret card had been revoked in New York, meaning she legally couldn't sing in city clubs. Major record companies weren't renewing contracts, and her income had dropped dramatically. Her financial situation was at disaster level. Debts were piling up, rent couldn't be paid, and some days she couldn't even find money for food. And emotionally, Billie was completely broken. Her last marriage had fallen apart, close friends had died, Lester Young had died 4 months earlier, and Billie hadn't recovered from this loss yet. Right at this point, Louis McKay reappeared. He visited Billie one day, and saw her condition: miserable, sick, broke and hopeless. McKay said sincerely, "Billie, you can't live like this. Let me help you. I'll get your affairs in order." Billie hesitated at first, but she had no choice. Nobody else was offering help. McKay continued. Look, I've known you for years. You're a great artist, but you're terrible at managing business. Let me be your manager. I'll handle all the financial stuff, organize concerts, and you just focus on singing. Billie asked, what do you want in return? McKay smiled and said, I just want your happiness. And maybe one day, we can be together again. Billie didn't say yes that day, but McKay insisted. In the following weeks, McKay actually helped. He organized a few concerts, paid off some debts, and supported Billie's daily life. And gradually, Billie started trusting McKay. In early 1957, McKay proposed to Billie. Billie, I want to marry you. Not just because I love you, but because I want to protect you. If we get married, I'll be your legal representative, and nobody can exploit you. I'll take care of you. Billie hesitated, because her past marriages had been disasters. But McKay was persuasive, and Billie was desperate. They got married in March 1957, a small ceremony, just a few witnesses, and Billie hoped maybe this time would be different. Maybe McKay really loved her. Maybe she'd finally found support. But Billie was wrong, because McKay had been waiting for this moment for over a decade. And now the trap had closed. In the first weeks after marriage, McKay was the perfect husband. He met Billie's needs, was kind, and said, let me handle it. Billie was comfortable because someone was finally taking care of her. But behind the scenes, McKay had started implementing his plan. First step, seizing financial control. McKay told Billie, Billie, you deal with art, I'll deal with business. I need access to your bank accounts, so I can pay the bills. Billie found it reasonable, and gave McKay joint access to her bank accounts. Second step. Legal representation. McKay declared himself Billie's official manager, and started signing all contracts. McKay even mediated with Billie's lawyer. Third step. Social isolation. McKay slowly started separating Billie from her friends. These people are using you. You don't need them, he'd say, and Billie started believing it. Within 6 months, McKay controlled every corner of Billie's life. But the control wasn't just financial, it was also physical and psychological. McKay started controlling Billie's heroin use. He told Billie, look, I want to get you off drugs, but quitting cold turkey is dangerous. We'll reduce it gradually. This sounded reasonable, and Billie agreed. But McKay's real purpose was different. McKay wasn't cleaning Billie up, he was making Billie dependent on him by controlling the addiction. McKay decided when to give Billie heroin, how much to give, and when to cut it off. This kept Billie in constant uncertainty. Billie didn't know when she could get drugs, so she obeyed McKay's every command. And the most sinister part of McKay's strategy was this. He kept Billie at a middle point, not making her too sick, but never completely healthy either. When Billie got too sick, McKay would give heroin, and Billie would feel better, then be grateful to McKay. But when Billie started getting a bit healthier, McKay would cut the dose, and Billie would start withdrawing, then become dependent on McKay again. This cycle made Billie completely dependent on McKay. Now Billie wasn't just addicted to heroin, she was addicted to McKay, because McKay was the gateway to heroin. And McKay used this power to the fullest. By late 1957, McKay accelerated the financial manipulation. He had full access to Billie's bank accounts, and started abusing this access. At first he withdrew small amounts, $100, $200, and Billie didn't notice. Then the amounts increased $1,000, $2,000, and when Billie questioned it, McKay said, bills, taxes, expenses, don't worry, I handled it. Billie believed him because McKay showed documents, but the documents were fake or inflated. McKay also controlled the income from Billie's concerts. When Billie gave a concert, the club owner gave the money to McKay, and McKay only gave Billie a portion. When Billie asked, McKay said the rest went to debts, management fees, taxes. But in reality, McKay was pocketing the money. By 1958, McKay became bolder. He started selling Billie's future royalty rights. He made deals with record companies and sold the rights to Billie's old recordings cheaply, then took the money and didn't tell Billie. He took out loans using Billie's name and forged Billie's signature. He mortgaged Billie's properties and borrowed money, and he did all these transactions without Billie's knowledge. Even Billie's lawyer didn't notice, because McKay was manipulating the lawyer too, showing some documents, hiding others, and the lawyer trusted McKay. Because McKay was Billie's husband. By early 1959, Billie's financial situation reached disaster level. There was almost no money left in the bank. Debts were piling up, and creditors were coming to the door. Billie was shocked. "Louis, what's happening? Why don't I have any money?" McKay calmly replied, "Billie, you spend too much, drugs are expensive, hospital bills are high, and concerts don't bring in income like they used to. I'm trying to fix the situation, but you need to be patient." Well, Billie believed him because she couldn't see any other explanation, but the truth was, McKay had stolen all of Billie's money. Billie Holiday, a legend who had made millions throughout her life, was now broke, and McKay was getting rich. McKay's most terrifying strategy was drug control. Instead of getting Billie off drugs, McKay made her more addicted and used this addiction as a control tool. McKay's logic was simple. If Billie got clean, got stronger, and got her mind back, she would notice McKay's tricks, but a sick, weak, and addicted Billie wouldn't notice anything. So McKay kept Billie at a constant medium level of sickness, not too sick, because then she couldn't perform and there would be no income, but never completely healthy, because then she wouldn't be dependent on McKay. McKay's tactic was this: when Billie was going to perform, McKay would give her enough heroin so Billie could stand on stage and sing. After the concert, McKay would cut off the heroin and Billie would start withdrawing. When Billie begged, McKay said, "Billie, you're using too much. You need to cut down. Look, this is for your own good." Billie tried to resist in pain, but McKay was harder than stone. A few days later, when Billie reached the point of not being able to take it anymore, McKay would give heroin and Billie would feel better, then thank McKay. This cycle made Billie psychologically completely dependent on McKay. Now McKay wasn't just a husband or manager, he was also Billie's survival source. Witnesses noticed this cycle. A friend later said, "When I visited Billie, sometimes she was good, sometimes very bad. One day energetic and talkative, the next day she couldn't get out of bed, and McKay was always around. She'd look at him, ask his permission. It was like Billie was a child, and McKay was the parent." Another witness said, "I saw McKay giving Billie drugs. Billie was begging, 'Please give me more,' and McKay was smiling and saying, 'No, this is enough.' That's when I understood McKay was controlling Billie, using heroin as reward and punishment." These testimonies came out later, but nobody intervened at the time, because McKay was Billie's husband and Billie defended McKay too. "He's taking care of me." Billie would say, "He's my only friend." In 1958, Billie's health rapidly deteriorated. She was diagnosed with liver cirrhosis, her heart weakened, and doctors warned, "If you don't quit drugs, you'll die within a year." Billie was scared and told McKay, "Louis, I need to quit. The doctors warned me." McKay showed understanding and said, "Okay, we'll quit together. I'll help you." But McKay was lying. He didn't help Billie quit, instead he controlled her more. Because McKay knew the sicker Billie got, the more dependent she would be on McKay. And McKay was right. By early 1959, Billie could barely walk, was constantly in and out of the hospital, and couldn't perform anymore. Income stopped, but McKay didn't care, because McKay was approaching the final stage of his plan. In May 1959, Billie's condition became critical. She was hospitalized, and doctors said, liver failure, heart problems, lung infection. Her condition is very serious. Billie stayed at Metropolitan Hospital for 2 months, and during those 2 months, McKay came every day, but not to visit Billie, to steal Billie's last possessions. McKay went through Billie's purse in the hospital room, took her documents, and conducted bank transactions. Nurses found it strange, but McKay was Billie's husband and had legal rights. Billie was so sick she didn't notice, she just saw McKay was there and felt comfortable. "Louis is here, he's taking care of me," she'd say, but the truth was much darker. Even while Billie was in the hospital, she tried to save money. When visitors came, they'd give small amounts of money, and Billie hid this money under her mattress. She told the nurses, "This is my funeral money. Please don't tell anyone." The nurses were sad, but respected Billie's wishes. Billie knew she was going to die, and after her death, nobody would pay for funeral expenses. That's why she was trying to save money for her own funeral. This thought was so tragic that the nurses cried. But what was even more tragic, Billie's fear was justified. Because McKay really wasn't going to pay for funeral expenses. July 17, 1959, was Billie Holiday's last day. At 9 a.m., Billie's condition worsened. Doctors called the family and said, "Be prepared, she doesn't have much time." Billie's mother Sadie Fagan came to the hospital, a few close friends came, and Louis McKay came. Billie was semi-conscious, couldn't speak, but her eyes were open. Sadie held her daughter's hand and cried. Friends prayed, and McKay sat in the corner, waiting. At 2 p.m., McKay suddenly stood up and said, "I need to handle some bank business. I'll be back soon." Sadie found it strange, because Billie was on her deathbed, and McKay was going to the bank, but McKay didn't care. He left the hospital, went to the bank, and withdrew the last $2,000 from Billie's account. The bank clerk asked, "Did Miss Holiday authorize this transaction?" McKay confidently replied, "Yes, I'm her husband, and legally authorized." The bank clerk believed him, and gave him the money. McKay put the money in his pocket and left. Billie's bank account was now completely empty. Only the $750 hidden under the mattress remained. At 3:10 a.m., Billie Holiday took her last breath, in the room were her mother Sadie, 2 friends, and a nurse. McKay wasn't there. He was still outside, maybe at the bank, maybe somewhere else. Billie closed her eyes and died. Sadie screamed, friends cried, and the nurse officially recorded the death. A few minutes later, while cleaning under the bed, the nurse found the $750. She showed it to Sadie, and Sadie cried more, because her daughter was worried even after death, trying to save money for her own funeral. She was that alone, that abandoned. McKay returned to the hospital. An hour later, when he entered the room, Billie's body was still there, covered. McKay paused, then approached the bed, and lifted the cover to look at Billie's face. He showed no emotion, just looked. Then he turned to the nurse, and said, "Who do I need to talk to about funeral arrangements?" The nurse directed him to hospital administration. McKay went, talked, and said something shocking. "I can't pay for funeral expenses. Billie has no money." Hospital administration was surprised, but Miss Holiday was a famous artist, surely she has money. McKay coldly said, "No, it's all gone, debts, hospital bills, everything's gone." He was lying, but nobody could know that. After Billie Holiday died, the funeral arrangement problem emerged. The hospital wanted funeral expenses. Paid embalming, ceremony, burial. Total cost was about $2,000. McKay refused to pay. Sadie Fagan tried to pay, but she had no money. Friends tried to collect money, but it wasn't enough. Billie Holiday, one of America's most famous jazz singers, was almost going to be buried in Potter's Field, the mass grave for the poor. This thought shamed everyone. Finally, the jazz community took action. Several famous musicians, Count Basie, John Hammond, and others, collected money and paid for funeral expenses. Billie's funeral was held on July 21, 1959. A small ceremony was held at St. Paul the Apostle Catholic Church. Thousands of fans poured into the streets, cried, and said goodbye to Lady Day. But Louis McKay sat in the front row at the ceremony, in a perfect suit, playing the role of the grieving husband. Nobody knew McKay was the man who killed Billie, but now he was playing the victim. After the funeral, McKay showed his true face completely. When Billie's friends wanted to organize a post-funeral gathering, McKay refused and said, "I'm Billie's husband, and I make the decisions." He collected Billie's personal belongings, jewelry, clothes, photos, and took everything. When Sadie Fagan asked for a memento of her daughter, McKay refused. "These belong to me." Friends were shocked, but legally couldn't do anything, because McKay was Billie's husband, and the law protected him. After Billie Holiday died, the real robbery began. McKay started making money, using Billie's royalties, recordings and name. First step: royalties. There was still an income stream from Billie's old recordings, radio broadcasts, record sales and reprints. McKay declared himself Billie's sole heir, and started collecting all royalty income. Sadie Fagan objected. "I'm Billie's mother, I have rights too," but McKay brought in lawyers, and won in court, because McKay was Billie's husband, and documents signed during the marriage gave McKay priority. Second step: selling Billie's story. In the early 1960s, Hollywood started getting interested in Billie Holiday's life story. McKay saw the opportunity, and presented himself to companies as a consultant. "I'm the person who knew Billie best, you need to work with me to tell her story." And companies hired McKay. In 1972, the movie Lady Sings the Blues was made. The film told Billie Holiday's life story, but distorted the truth. In the film, McKay's character was shown as a supportive and loving husband. In reality, McKay was an exploiter and manipulator, but the film made him a hero, and McKay made hundreds of thousands of dollars from these lies. Third step: using Billie's image. McKay started using Billie's name, photos, and voice for commercial purposes. He licensed Billie's image for advertisements, products, and events and took money. Billie's family and friends protested. "McKay is exploiting Billie, this is immoral," but legally, they couldn't do anything. McKay was the legal heir, and had the right to use Billie's name however he wanted, and McKay used this right to the fullest. By the 1980s, Louis McKay was a wealthy man. When Billie Holiday died, McKay had almost nothing, but now he lived in a luxury house, drove expensive cars, and lived a comfortable life. He'd made everything off Billie's back while Billie was alive. He stole her money. After Billie died, he stole her legacy, and McKay never had to answer for it, never stood trial, never got punished, because what he did was technically considered legal. McKay was Billie's husband. Billie had voluntarily given him financial authority, and after Billie died, McKay was the legal heir. The system protected McKay, and nobody protected Billie. In the 1970s and 1980s, some witnesses started speaking. One of Billie's hospital nurses said in an interview, "McKay would come every day but not to visit Billie. He'd go through Billie's purse, take her documents. One day I asked, 'Mr. McKay, what are you doing?' He said, 'I'm her husband. This is my right.' We found it strange but couldn't intervene." Another nurse said, "Billie was hiding money under her mattress. She told us, 'Please don't tell anyone. This is my funeral money.' It was very sad." Billie was worried about her own funeral because she didn't trust McKay. One of Billie's close friends said in a 1975 interview, "McKay killed Billie. Maybe he didn't kill her physically, but he destroyed her in every way. He kept her drug addicted, stole her money and stole her legacy after her death. And now he presents himself as Billie's loving husband. This is disgusting." Another friend said, "We all knew what McKay was doing, but Billie defended him. 'He's taking care of me,' she'd say. 'What could we do?' Billie said she loved McKay, but in reality, Billie was dependent on him because of drugs. The most striking testimony came from Billie's doctor. In 1982, he published an article in a medical journal analyzing Billie's final years. The doctor wrote, "Miss Holiday's heroin use showed an irregular pattern, sometimes heavy use, sometimes none at all. This is strange because most addicts use regularly. Miss Holiday's situation looked as if someone was controlling her access to drugs. In retrospect, there are strong suspicions that her husband, Mr. McKay, was exercising this control. This statement was like a bomb. A medical expert was formally accusing Louis McKay, but by then Billie was long dead and McKay had gotten rich. The system that allowed Louis McKay to exploit Billie Holiday was full of legal loopholes. First, marriage laws. In the 1950s, marriage contracts gave husbands broad authority in the wife's financial affairs. When McKay married Billie, he automatically became Billie's financial representative. He had access to Billie's money, authority to sign contracts, and the right to make financial decisions. And unless Billie objected, she didn't because she trusted McKay. McKay could do whatever he wanted. Second, drug laws. Heroin was illegal, so Billie had to keep her drug use secret. This gave McKay an advantage, because if Billie went to the police and said, "My husband is controlling me with drugs," the police would arrest Billie, not McKay. Because Billie was the user, the criminal, McKay could just play the role of concerned husband trying to help his wife. That's why Billie could never complain. Third, inheritance laws. When Billie died, McKay automatically became the legal heir. Billie had no will mice, or if she did, McKay destroyed it. So the court declared McKay the sole heir. Sadie Fagan objected but lost, because the law prioritized the husband, and McKay got all of Billie's estate, royalties, recordings, personal belongings, everything. These legal loopholes didn't just protect McKay. They also showed the way to future exploiters. Billie Holiday's tragedy wasn't unique. Hundreds of artists were similarly exploited during that era, by bad managers, abusive spouses, and fraudulent contracts. The system didn't protect them, and many died broke like Billie. Louis McKay died in 1981. He was 72 years old and had lived a comfortable life. Before dying, he gave a few interviews and talked about Billie. Did he show remorse? No. On the contrary, he presented himself as a victim. In one interview he said, "Billie was a very difficult woman. I tried to help her but she couldn't quit drugs. I did everything I could." In another interview he said, "I didn't steal Billie's money. She spent her money on drugs, hospital bills. I just took care of her in her final years." People who heard these lies were angry. One of Billie's friends wrote a letter to the newspaper. "McKay is a liar. He killed Billie, and now he's trying to make himself a hero. This is unacceptable." But McKay didn't respond, because public opinion was irrelevant. McKay had already won. He had money, a comfortable life, and was legally protected. What more could he want? When McKay died, a small funeral was held. A few family members and former business associates attended. Nobody from the jazz community went, because the jazz world hated McKay. McKay was remembered as the man who destroyed Billie Holiday, and nobody forgave him. On McKay's gravestone, only his name and dates are written: Louis McKay, 1909 to 1981. Billie Holiday's name isn't even mentioned, as if McKay and Billie had no connection. But the truth that went down in history is this: Louis McKay was the man who exploited Billie Holiday, stole her money, caused her death, and plundered her legacy after death. And he was never punished. Today, more than 60 years later, Billie Holiday's name still lives. Her voice is still heard, her songs are still sung, and her story is still told. But her financial legacy is complex and controversial. Billie made millions throughout her life, but died broke. Louis McKay stole her money and never gave it back. When McKay died, he left Billie's royalty rights to his family, but by then the rights had been sold to other companies, contracts had been signed, and a complex legal web had been created. In the 2000s, Billie's legacy was re-evaluated. Historians, lawyers, and activists documented McKay's theft and exposed it to the public. The movie Lady Sings the Blues was criticized because it had shown McKay better than he was. New biographies were written, and McKay's true face was revealed. Now everyone knew Louis McKay wasn't a hero, he was an exploiter. But this belated justice didn't help Billie. Billie died in 1959, poor, sick, and alone. McKay destroyed her, and never had to answer for it. This injustice is the story not just of Billie, but of hundreds of artists exploited during that era. The system didn't protect them, and many were forgotten. But Billie Holiday wasn't forgotten, because Billie's voice was so powerful that no exploiter could silence it. McKay stole Billie's money, plundered her legacy, but couldn't steal her voice. And today, Billie's voice is still here, still powerful, and still telling us about betrayal, exploitation, and injustice. What Louis McKay did to Billie Holiday isn't just a story of one man exploiting one woman. This is the story of a systemic problem. McKay wasn't alone. Hundreds of managers, husbands, and helpers exploited artists during that era. And the system protected them, because laws were written in favor of exploiters. Husbands had broad authority, artists were unprotected, and nobody was held accountable. Is the situation better today? Partially. Artist rights have strengthened, marriage laws have changed, and awareness has increased. But problems still exist. Artists are still being exploited, still being scammed by bad managers, and still having their legacies stolen after death. Billie Holiday's story is a warning. The people you trust can hurt you the most. Money isn't love, and laws don't always ensure justice. Billie Holiday died on July 17, 1959. Louis McKay killed her mind, maybe not physically, but in every other way. McKay controlled Billie with drugs, stole her money, and plundered her legacy after her death. McKay was never punished, but he went down in history as a monster, as an exploiter, and as the man who destroyed Billie Holiday. And Billie became a legend. Her voice still lives, her story is still told, and her name will never be forgotten. McKay stole Billie's money, but couldn't steal her soul. And that's Billie's victory. If you or someone you know is experiencing financial exploitation or abuse, please seek help. Don't stay silent. Because Billie Holiday taught us silence protects exploiters. Speaking up saves lives.